The Tank Museum is located near the center of the south coast of England, somewhat to the west of the city of Portsmouth, and to the near west of Poole and Bournemouth, and just north of the town of Wool. While it is a private charity organization, it is located on the grounds or adjacent to the grounds of Bovington Camp, a British military facility. The collection is housed in a large modern museum facility with its own workshops and outdoor demonstration area with amphitheater. The museum is a collection of armored fighting vehicles tracing the history of the tank. With nearly 300 vehicles from 26 countries on display, it is the world's largest collection of its kind. It includes the only working example of a German Tiger I tank and a British World War II Mark I tank, the oldest surviving combat tank. At the end of World War I, Bovington Camp had a collection of salvaged tanks, and writer Rudyard Kipling suggested that a tank museum should be set up. The museum was soon established, but it was not open to the public until 1947. The collection has grown significantly since then, as we will soon see. So it's the morning of May 28th, 2019, and we're here in the Tank Museum. This is a miniature mock-up of Leonardo da Vinci's tank design. So this is the main gallery. It's the so-called Tank Story Gallery. It's a Mark II tank.
Take a trench, for instance. This piece will cross an 8-foot wide trench if it's done properly. But get it wrong, you just fall in. It's the devil's own job getting out again. I've also got to keep the engine running. And you can imagine, if something can go wrong in battle, it will. Being stuck out in no man's land trying to start an overheated engine by hand is no fun, I can tell you that. Feeding it with petrol, every gun for miles around is trying to hit you. It can be a nightmare.
This top one is a Hotchkiss automatic gun, and this one down here is a Lewis gun, or the Lewis automatic machine rifle. And down below with all the glare is a German anti-tank rifle. This is a Crossley Chevrolet armored car. And this is the Lanchester Mark II armored car. And this is a Carden Lloyd Mark VI carrier. Two-seater with the engine stuck immediately in between the two guys on either side. A little hard to see. There's one seat, there's the engine, and then the other seat on the other side. And this is the medium tank Mark II. And this is a Vickers Armstrong Mark E tank. And this is the medium Mark A again. I think I glossed over that earlier. And this is a Panzer II. This is the Light Mark 6B. This tank I've been looking at here is a Char, or C-H-A-R B model. I believe this is French, but the display screen isn't working for it, so I can't be sure. Oh. Okay, this one is around the other side. So a Char B1 or Char, I'm not sure how that's pronounced. Huge, well-armored, and with two big guns. Was regarded as the most fearsome fighting machine when it first appeared in 1935. This is a Crusader 3 or cruiser tank Mark 6. Used in the North Africa campaign. Light tank M3A1 Stuart 4. It is a American design. This is a Panzer III. This is the Valentine, or the Infantry Tank Mark III. This is a British tank.
These shells could penetrate the 5 to 7 centimeter armor of the Allied tanks at nearly 2 miles away. Protection was the other key strength of the Tiger.
This is the Grant Medium M3. This is another British tank.
The Tiger was Hitler's pet. The Nazi leader himself was involved in specifying the design of the super tank. It had to be capable of mounting the 88mm Type 26 gun, originally designed as an anti-aircraft. Two components of Porsche and Porsche were to build a prototype in time for the first aircraft in the 1952. The Porsche design was chosen.
When we were on exercise, we used to wear that a lot. Sometimes we had to wear all that for a whole day.
And this is a Leopard, which is a German tank. Here's an assortment of tank guns. This is another British tank, the Chieftain. This is the Alvis Scorpion, a British design for reconnaissance and recce's, as they would call it. And this is a Leyland L60 engine. So it's nominally a diesel engine, but it can run on multi-fuels, regular gas stations and things like that. Could be used to fuel them up. This is the T-62. It's a Russian tank. This is a Challenger 2. British tank. This is a Saladin armored car. It's British. And this is a Ferret scout car. British origin, used by the United Nations. And this is a T-72 main battle tank. This is Russian. Back around the Saladin armored car, and here we have a U.S. tank. And this is an M48 Patton, United States. And this is the Centurion. This is British. This is a Churchill Mark VII crocodile out of England or the UK. And this is a Sherman Firefly from the United Kingdom. And this is a Cromwell cruiser tank, British tank. And this is a Daimler armored car. This is the Cromwell again.
Germans played face with this kind of it's an interesting one.
And this is a Panther tank from Germany. And this is a T-34/85, which is Russian.
When they were rushed in to take part in the battle first, a lot of them were sort of broken. Very different from the Russian. Let us move on from
There's a tank with the flails in the front, which is supposed to rip through barbed wire and set off mines and things like that on the beaches, for example, in Normandy.
Floating tank. Tank tracks turn. The propellers will move as well. So
I see. Somehow
it is the only one of its kind left in the world now.
Yeah. So that canvas barrier is supposed to provide enough displacement to allow the heavy tank to float.
Yeah.
That's one thing I've never heard of.
With the little ones trying to describe displacement, but we use examples of that, put some marbles in and float it.
That's a good demonstration.
Do you know where this one goes?
Now over there the other groups and get moving. Right, Mr. Coles. I see from this paperwork here that you're 22 years old and work in a corn mill with your father. You say you've got good experience with motor cars and mechanical things. Well, they're exactly the type of skills we're looking for. A new unit has been set up where technical knowledge will be very important. It's all a bit top secret and hush hush and you can't say too much. Corporal, where is that cup of tea? Thank you, Mr. Coles. We'll find out more soon. Now over there we have a group and
George, here's some seats. That was quite a send-off for you, I didn't expect so much attention. No, why? Before you march on the side of a sneaky dog. Nothing to see here. Reminds me how many people on this.
What, Mr. Coles? I see from this paperwork here that you're 22 years old and work in a corn mill with your father. You say you've got good experience in motor cars and mechanical things. They're exactly the type of skills we're looking for. Well, they do use it nice out. I don't know what become very well thank you or better
This is a Mark I tank up there.
I'm going to go out this way and then get some lunch.
This is a Mark IV. It's a mass-produced tank. And this is a Mark V with an improved engine. This is a Mark IX. This is a Mark V. This is a Mark 8, an Anglo-American design. Come on. Well, it's dark in here. This is from the side gun port, but I'll try to lighten it up in post-production. There's your two drivers' controls.
It makes me so proud at the end of the day when Father says, Hector, what would I do without
Excuse me.
What's the name? It's a horse. A horse there.
Push the window open and then you can see out. No, it doesn't. What will it do?
Sami chcesz spróbować zobacz jak się nasiodla się, może tam muszę zobaczyć jak się nasiodla.
Stuck with that one now.
This is an independent heavy tank A1E1 British design. And this is a Peerless armored car. Made in Great Britain and Ireland. Or used by Great Britain and Ireland, rather. It's a British design. This is a light tank Mark 2A, it looks like, from 1931 through 1940. It's a British tank. This is a Tiger II. Pre-production example. German tank. And this is a Yacht Tiger. This is the largest and heaviest tracked vehicle to fight in the Second World War. And this is a Tiger II, the production model.
Nazwisko jaka armia?
This is a T-34/76. It's a and this is a Tiger I.
Put the smaller road doors on, put the smaller truck on, put it onto a train, move it, and get the other end.
So they normally would have had the tank here that was representing the one in the movie Fury, and it's going to be at the demonstration at 1 o'clock, which is about half an hour from now, and I'm hoping to see it there. Now we're into the World War II gallery. This is a tortoise. It's a British tank. This is a praying mantis, an experimental machine gun carrier from Great Britain. An infantry tank A-35, the Valiant, also Great Britain, but it never entered service. This is a cruiser tank Ram Mark II, designed and built in Canada. And a Thornycroft Bison, which is another British concrete armored lorry. So it's a truck, but it's got cast concrete armor on it. This is a Matilda Canal Defense Light from Great Britain. And a Universal Carrier, also from Great Britain. It's better known as the Bren gun carrier. This is, I believe, an operating tank. A lot of the tanks here work, and they're used for various purposes and demonstrations. They're in movies. This is an infantry tank Mark III, the Valentine Mark II British tank. And this is a Panzerkampfwagen 4 from Germany, obviously. And this is a light tank Mark VII, the Tetrarch, or Tetrarch. Vickers Armstrong, UK. And an M1441 medium tank. This is manufactured by Fiat. And this is a Panzer III Model N, German. This is one of those chain flails that they had for clearing minefields and so on. And it's mounted on a Sherman tank, a Sherman 5. And this is supposed to represent a general aircraft Hamilcar glider, so they could actually glide tanks into battle locations. Wooden structure. It was the light tank Mark 7, the Tetrarch I mentioned already, is the one it was designed to carry. So they don't have the whole thing here, but they've got an example of a cockpit up there. And this is a Centaur dozer, so it's a tank bulldozer. And this is an M9A1 armored half-track. This is a U.S. tank or armored carrier. And this is the Chaffee light tank M24. This is another American design. And this is a 88 millimeter Panzerjäger Jagdpanther. And that's the Hetzer Jagdpanzer. The Sturmgestütz 3 German tank, and the light tank M3A1 Stuart 4, it's American. And a T-17E1 Staghound armored car from Great Britain, and the Valentine Archer from Great Britain. And this is a AEC armored car Mark II, Great Britain. This is a Centurion Mark I, British tank, and a tank cruiser Comet 1, Great Britain. And this is a Schmalturm turret. Maximum thickness of plates facing frontal attack. I don't know if I got this guy or not. I'm getting kind of turned around in here. An NSU Springer, German. Heavy armored car, German. And the Goliath, or Goliath, I suppose, German bomb on tracks.
This is the smallest vehicle.
And the Ram Kangaroo from Canada. The M22 Locust light tank, that's a US tank. And the M10 tank destroyer is American. And there's a Panzer I command tank. And that's an A-10 Cruiser Mark II ACS, British design. And the heavy tank M26 General Pershing, famous American tank. And this is a Carrier M29C Weasel. It's kind of a tracked Jeep that could carry other, manufactured by Studebaker. It's a U.S. tank. And then it's on top of a landing vehicle tracked Mark IV Buffalo, which is an American design for Food Machinery Corporation, California. And this is a Valentine bridge layer. It's British. And an infantry tank Mark I A11 Matilda. It's British. A Humber scout car. British. Saracen special water dispenser. A powerful tool for riot control. This is a British design. Here they've got a tank that's been cut in half. It's a Centurion Mark III.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. One o'clock today, we have a tank action display in the arena. To watch the display, please make your way to the museum to Joe will last approximately 30 minutes. That's our new time-zone detailed tank action display here at 1 o'clock.
And that's a Cruiser Mark V A13 Mark III Covenanter. And an M4A1 Sherman Michael. It used a Wright Continental engine, so it's basically a radial engine just like you'd find on an airplane. This is a heavy tank KV-1B. It's a Soviet design. and the Su-76M light mechanized gun. It's another Russian design. So they're announcing that the live demonstration will take place shortly, so I have to make my way outside, figure out how to get there.
There's a few people up there.
Oh, I know what display they do. I think they do it the same way.
Hey?
Like looking that way.
Yeah.
I thought it was... You want to be right?
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Does that sound loud enough for you? Loud enough for you, he says. You've got to put your hands up. Can you hear that okay? Very good, thank you. Right. So what we're going to do for you now is we're going to put on a display that'll last, we hope, about half an hour, and with any luck at the end of the display you'll have a little bit more idea about what some of those different types of armoured vehicles we have here at the museum, what they're there for. And we're particularly today going to show you some of the vehicles that were used in the D-Day and the Normandy campaign that we've got here in our collection, and one or two that have been lent to us, so we can show those off to you. Now, on with our display. We're going to start the display by showing you a range of vehicles that the military used in Normandy, and including some that we don't often have here, what we call soft skin vehicles. In other words, we tend to be about tanks, armoured cars, armoured personnel carriers. We're going to show you some of the other types of vehicles that were absolutely crucial to the Normandy campaign and to winning the war as a whole. And as you can see, the first one coming on now, most of you in the audience, you'll recognise that as the classic Jeep. That vehicle and the vehicle after it, this vehicle is called a weapons carrier, and it would take a section of infantry, we'll see them in a moment, and then a GMC truck. And all of these vehicles are examples of what America in World War II was brilliant at. In the 1930s, America had a tiny army. It's what they call a cadre army. The American war plan was, if a war comes, we are going to throw money at the problem, and that is literally what they did. In the 20s and 30s, they experimented with trying to work out what would be a good engine, what would be a good suspension system. And pretty much in America, for tanks for example, they built 2 tanks a year in the 20s and 30s. That's all they built. It was just, let's have a go and see what happens, and work out what we think would be the best way to build vehicles if a war was to come. And again, if you look at those vehicles going around at the moment, it's exactly what they did. 1939, the war in Europe kicks off. The Americans start putting their war plans into operation. They get all the motor manufacturers in. They sit down with them and they say, what's going to be the quickest and best way we can build the right sort of vehicles? And they've been doing some experiments in the 30s. A company called Bantam, in 49 days, comes up with a prototype of the Jeep. And Ford and Willys are brought in, ready to be used, and they mass produce this Jeep, and it's called a quarter-ton vehicle. The whole idea, quarter-ton, it's the weight it can carry. That's the way that they judge or give classes to American vehicles in the Second World War. With the weapons carrier, Dodge, big manufacturer, they do a whole series of different types of vehicles with different bodies on the back depending on the use it's going to be put to. And this vehicle, in the back at the moment, we've got some volunteer infantry that we picked out the audience a little bit earlier on. We're going to see them go into an attack a bit later on in our display. But there they are, like a section of infantry in the back of that weapons carrier. And then at the end there, you've got something called the GMC truck. Now the truck here that we've got, 2.5 tons it could carry as loads. They made about just under 500,000 of those trucks in World War II, and they were used by the British, by Commonwealth forces. 25,000 were shipped out to Russia to keep the Soviet army supplied. And the whole point of all of these vehicles, you've been here to look at tanks today, that tank can't keep going unless it's got supply vehicles like these GMC trucks to bring it up, the ammunition so it can fight, the fuel so it can travel around, the food to keep the soldiers fed. And that's why the logistics side of the war is so important if we ever overlook that. Now, here as well, you're in a part of the world that way back in 1944, May of 44, this is where the American army was assembling, ready to go down to Weymouth and Portland to head off in vehicles just like this one for the D-Day landings and then that following fighting in Normandy. And one of the things that is quite hard, I think, for us nowadays to comprehend is the sheer scale of that undertaking. Not just all the vehicles they were building, just over 500,000 Jeeps, I mentioned. Bit of a comparison, the German equivalent, the Kugelwagen, the Germans in the entire war made 50,000 of those, compared to that 500,000 of the Jeep. So those first vehicles are soft skin vehicles, that's what the military tends to call them. Now an A-vehicle, an armoured vehicle. This one here is an American half-track. This version of it is called the M16, and again it's taking apart all these different versions. The whole point, they've all got a different number or code name, is for the very simple reason that if you're asking for spare parts, there's no point asking for parts for an M3 when you've got an M16 that's got a slightly different carburettor on it or something like that. The M16 defines this vehicle. It's a half-track, but it's got those 4 machine guns in an anti-aircraft mount on the back, something called a Maxim mount. And that's powered, and the idea is, we were worried, or the Allied forces worried about the Luftwaffe. How are we going to protect all our men, all our tanks when they go ashore on D-Day and they're fighting those battles inland? Now, you need some sort of protection from the ground. We've got the Air Force to hopefully fight off the Luftwaffe, but here we've got some form of ground protection. And that mounting on the back is powered. It takes power off the engine, it can spin around quite quickly, and with 4 what they call .50 caliber machine guns on the back, that's got quite a bit of firepower. Now the Browning .50 machine gun was invented in World War I. Armies all around the world are still using it to this day because basically it's another one of those things that's very hard to improve on. It does what it says on the tin. If it fires an armour-piercing bullet, 1/2 inch across, hence .50, that bullet will quite happily go through the front of your car, all through the engine block, right out the rear end. It has one hell of a lot of oomph behind it. And with 4 of those together, firing at an incoming aircraft, that's a lot of firepower. Now the great advantage for the Allies were the RAF and the US Air Force had got so effective at knocking down the Luftwaffe on the months leading up to D-Day. By the time the troops landed, there was very little German air power present. So these vehicles, designed to protect the troops, they realised actually we don't need them for anti-aircraft defence, so they ended up using them against ground targets instead. And if you look at the rear, the sides of the metal can fold down, and that means you can actually fire those machine guns parallel to the ground at ground targets. And they had this vehicle ended up with a charmingly awful title, the Meat Chopper. You can imagine what those bullets are doing to people in that ground attack role. So they were still used a lot in that Northwest European campaign from D-Day onwards, but not really for knocking down aeroplanes. Now the whole idea of a half track sounds obvious, but wheels at the front to steer, tracks at the back means it spreads the weight of the vehicle out over the ground, so you can actually go to places a wheeled vehicle can't get to. And what the Americans did with the M3 half track, they took the front off the white Scout car or four-wheel drive vehicle, glued it to a tracked rear end, and you've got a half track. Very sensible thing to do. Now, even though the Americans were supplying so much equipment to the British, the Commonwealth Army and the Soviet Union, of course we were making our own at the same time. And this is a brilliant bit of British design. We always like looking in the museum. Everyone falls in love with those big German tanks. Actually, we didn't do so badly ourselves. That's one of the kind of myths of World War II. All the British stuff was never as good as the Germans. This is a vehicle the Germans envied no end. We built a vehicle called the Dingo, a little fast scout car, and they built a souped-up version of it. They designed it in 1939. It first sees action in 1941, and there's some older blokes in the audience. You might remember having this as a dinky toy as a kid. The Daimler armoured car was absolutely superb at what it did. That vehicle can go up to about 50 miles an hour on the open road. It's got reverse steering, so if needed, if it bumps into the enemy driving down the road somewhere, the driver can put it into reverse, and the commander leans down, looks out the back, and he's got his own steering wheel at the rear, so they can drive out of trouble if they bump into the enemy. It's got this odd faceted shaped body. Underneath all that, there is actually no chassis at all. Everything that vehicle does is actually attached to that armour plating. And what you've got there is a petrol engine, a Daimler 95 horsepower petrol engine in the rear, driver's in the front. You can see he's got his hatch open at the moment. If he comes under fire, he closes that down and looks out of a glass vision block. On the top, you've got the commander in the turret. They took the turret off something called the Tetrarch-like tank, and that gun in the turret is what the British would call a 2-pounder. Now, it always gets confusing when we talk about guns. Is it 40mm, 2-pounder? The British used to class their guns by the weight of shot that was fired. So 2 pounds in weight. That was quite a punchy gun because that would fire a slug of metal at high velocity to punch through enemy armour. Nowadays, we call it a 40mm gun. The size of the hole we tend to measure across the end of the barrel. That's why we call that, that's how they tend to judge guns today, by that the size of the hole. So overall, a really adaptable vehicle. It had run flat tyres, so if somebody shot your tyre, it would still hold up enough so you could get out of trouble. And this was used by the British forces in North Africa. It ended up, lots of armies all around the world, they were still in service well into the 1960s. And one or two Middle Eastern countries still use them. They show them off at parades. They've still got them in their arsenals, as it were. So that was a British reconnaissance vehicle for scouting ahead of the enemy, or scouting ahead to find the enemy before your main force would advance. So a couple of armoured vehicles now, a proper tank coming on now. This tank many of you may recognise if you've seen that Fury movie, because it's a tank we lent to the filmmakers with Brad Pitt in the top. Back to that, Americans experimenting in the 20s and 30s, they've tried different suspension systems, they've looked at different types of gun, and again in 1939, early 1940, they sent their engineers to Europe to see what was going on, and they realised they wanted a 75mm, so 7.5 centimetres across that hole at the end of the barrel, 75mm gun they said was going to be what we're going to need. And they also realised that they're going to have to build a tank that in America that's going to get shipped to Europe, that's going to get shipped to the Pacific, so let's limit it to 30 tonnes, that's what they said, so they can move it easily. The one thing about the Sherman tank, that this got called by the British, we named all the American tanks after Civil War generals. That's because Churchill said, what's an M4, what's an M3? Give me a name that I can latch on to. So they called them after Civil War generals. This was General Sherman, and the Sherman, the M4 Sherman, the Americans made in the war over 55,000 of these Sherman tanks. Give you an idea, at the moment, Britain has got about 280 tanks in service. It's full, and of those, probably about 30 on a good day work. 55,000 Sherman tanks made by the Americans. That's an awful lot of tanks, really quickly. So many, they couldn't make them all with the same engine, so they had to make different types of engine. There were just too many. So hence, an M4A1, an M4A2, M4A3, different engine types. So this particular Sherman is called an M4A2. It's got a twin diesel engine in the back. Most of them were petrol engines. And this particular Sherman is a later war model. They improve on the tanks the whole time throughout the war, and this one's got a slightly bigger gun. It's a 76mm gun instead of 75, so if you measure that hole at the end of the barrel, but it's a longer high velocity gun, which means the rounds come out with, again, a lot more force behind them, so if you're firing at an enemy tank, you end up firing that round out the end of the barrel. If it's armour piercing, it tends to be solid steel, and it smashes its way through the enemy's armour. Diesel engine in the back, crew of 5, 3 guys in the turret, 2 down the front. You've got a commander, a loader who's ramming those 76mm shells in the breech of the gun, and a gunner who sits in front of the commander, who's actually got a foot pedal that he stamps on once he's aimed the gun to fire it. In the front, on the right as you face it, there's a driver, on the other side a co-driver, or a bow machine gunner, and he operates the radio as well. And as you can imagine, in that sort of space, not much room inside a tank for anything else, and boy do you have to get on with your other crew members. You're living with each other, living on top of each other, and of course in combat, if you don't fight as a team, you're lost. And one of the other really important things that we tell soldiers today here at Bovington, where the Army's still training, you can have the best kit in the world, but if the crew don't know how to use it, it's no good to anyone. So training, training, training. American Shermans actually beat some bigger German tanks later in the war because the crews knew what they were doing, the German crews didn't. Now the Sherman's a good example of just how any track vehicle works. The engine powers the toothed wheels at the front. That's the only wheels that are powered. And the wheels that are resting on the ground spread the weight of the tank out. So what you're doing with the track vehicle, you're laying your own roadway in front of you, biting into it, pulling yourself along it, picking it up behind you and throwing it forward again. So in the army, it's to knock out a tank, break a track, and they call that a mobility kill. It won't go anywhere apart from in a circle. Things make up a tank, I have to say, so they're very complex bits of machinery, but how many's in there, goodness knows. Right, so what we're going to do for you now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move the vehicles off, and as they disappear, just back to that business about the Battle of Normandy, back in the summer of 1944. I mentioned earlier, if you're on holiday in this neck of the woods, you might not know it, but a lot of the roads around here, some of them were widened to get these vehicles down to the port, ready to go across. At Weymouth, that's where the Americans left that were going to be attacking Omaha, and that's where also from Weymouth Harbour they left the Rangers that were going to be attacking a place called Point de Hoc. It was one of the gun emplacements that they were particularly worried about. There may have been guns in there that could have knocked out an awful lot of the Allied vehicles. So when we talk about this area around here, there's lots and lots of things that people, if they're pointed out to you, you can see that remind people about that 1944 campaign. And if you happen to go to Portland Harbour, there's still some of those huge concrete caissons in Portland Harbour that were spare for taking over to France for making the Mulberry Harbours, this harbour that was designed over in Britain. We knew we might not capture a port, we take our own harbour with us. And if you happen to go to Portland, look out for those, as well as there's a D-Day museum there that's worth having a look at. We were also talking this morning here at the museum, one of the other things that was going on in Britain was we knew the Germans would be waiting for us, but we did a massive deception plan called Fortitude. And some of the film studios like Shepperton and Pinewood, they made massive numbers of pretend tanks, pretend landing craft that were all over in Kent to try and persuade the Germans that we were about to go and land in the Pas de Calais, another region of France, heavily defended by the Germans. We had all our embassy staff in neutral countries around the world buying up any possible map of the Pas de Calais so that German agents might think that's where we're going to land. Lots and lots of things were going on as deception, as well as radio traffic, dummy armies, and it worked because actually the Germans kept 20 divisions all up in Scandinavia, thinking we might attack there, and overall in Europe, even though the majority of the fighting was really going on in the Eastern Front, there was 1 million German soldiers defending the rest of Europe, waiting for that Allied invasion. That's why it was so important. It stopped Hitler being able to concentrate his forces all in one place. Now, we're not going to do a D-Day landings for you. We're going to show you a little bit about what some of that fighting might have been like out in Normandy. And one of the great advantages the Allies had was not only fantastic air power, we had great artillery as well. By having so much artillery, we could put barrages down on the German positions. Whenever we were going to be attacking, we could keep their heads down. We could try. We had that luxury of having the ammunition to do it. Now the Germans, they tended to keep their tanks away from the D-Day beaches. They kept them in units together, ready for a counter-attack. And to our great advantage, we know that Hitler was only the person who was allowed to give the order for a counter-attack. Nobody was prepared to wake him on the night of D-Day and say, the Allies are coming. They let him sleep. He didn't give the order till much later the following day to move his tanks. And that gave the Allies a chance to get a foothold in the Normandy countryside. Now there's a German tank coming on there. This one actually is what the Germans would have called something called a Sturmgeschütz. This is basically a Panzer III tank without a turret. They just put the gun in the front of the hull, and by doing that, you can make 3 of these for the cost of 2 turreted tanks. That's a great advantage there. Now, of course, if we are attacking, back to what we saw earlier, we need to be using our reconnaissance vehicles, going ahead of the main force, finding out where the enemy are, so that before we put in our attack, we know roughly where they are, their numbers, and other things that happen with reconnaissance. Really important as well is that is what's the best route forward hidden from the enemy? Can we go around tree lines without the enemy seeing us? Can we go over a bridge? Will it take the weight of our big heavy tanks coming up? Those are all things that are done with vehicles like our Daimler armoured car there, reporting back over what one of the commanders called his best weapon was the radio. They were so clever at being able to sneak forward. Radio, where were those German positions? What's going to be the best way of attacking them? All of that, he doesn't necessarily take on the enemy himself, he does that reporting so they know when they are going to attack what is the best way of doing it. That was that great advantage of having really quiet wheeled armour. Wheels tend to be quieter than tracks. Tracks will get you places wheels won't go, but that idea, if you're looking for stealth, a wheeled vehicle tends to be better. So there's our recce vehicle. It's sent that message back, so now our armour and our infantry know where they're going to be attacking. So here comes our Sherman tank, coming round, and again, sometimes again there's the idea of infantry armour cooperation, something we have to seem to learn in every war. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? So I think the Germans have missed. I'd like to think there, he says really quickly. And there's our Sherman lining itself up.
Oh no.
Taking it up, we've got a hit on our Sterngeschütz, but that idea of them fighting together, tanks and tanks, yes, absolutely, but most tanks actually get knocked out by anti-tank guns, and any tank needs infantry to support it when it's doing its fighting. So from the point of view of, if you look down there, there's our half-track vehicle coming with some fire support. But the really important vehicle, there's our weapons carrier with our volunteer infantry in the back of it. And those volunteer infantry, again, they will be so important in actually taking and holding ground. And again in Normandy, we had to learn the lesson. How do the infantry communicate with the guys in the tank? How do they work together? If they train together, go out for a beer together, they tend to fight better together. That was a lesson that was learnt over that Normandy campaign. So here's our volunteering, debussing or jumping out the back of the vehicle. There's our volunteers lining up, and they're going to put in what we call a section attack. And if you look, one section runs forward at a time, drops down, followed by the other section. Now the whole point there is you keep in a straight line so you don't run in front of your mate and get shot up by the backside by your own guys. Really important that you keep spread out and in a straight line. And there the section commander who's got the Germans in his sight with our volunteers there. Bloodthirsty lot we have today. Oh, pathetic. Look at that. Germans are thrown in the tunnel already. Well done, our volunteers there. Give them a round of applause. They've actually done very well. They did pick that up in literally 10 minutes before the show began. And there we are, we can all sleep safely in our beds tonight. That particular German's position has fallen. So, what we're going to do for you now, ladies and gentlemen, we'll clear the vehicles from the field. They are going to go and park up down in front of our Vehicle Conservation Centre. And if you want to go and have a closer look at them, do so in the next half hour or so. Go and have your photo taken, go and have a look, go and talk to the crews that'll be over there. We will be opening that Vehicle Conservation Centre again fairly shortly. You can have a look inside there, which is again another fantastic part of the collection. And we'll also be running our rides vehicle from the bottom corner there. That'll be running till 4:30 this afternoon. And can I just remind you, I know you're probably all on holiday, you bought a ticket today. That ticket is for a whole year attending here at the Tank Museum. There's a few special event days you can't use it on, but if you do have the opportunity, do come back and visit us again. Check the website if you've got any doubts. And I do hope the weather stays nicer for you and you have a great time down here in Dorset. Thank you very much.